Hi, in this fourth devlog, I am going to talk about what I have been learning further. Interestingly enough, in project 1, I skipped a little bit at the end because to me it didn't make sense at the time. So I did the second prototype and then I went back to the first prototype and I finished the extra parts of that, which were a lab and a tutorial. So the lab was actually about how to make a design document, and it was pretty hands-on. I just had to write up a project design document, and following that there was a tutorial about project management and collaboration and basically working with people on a game and for game development. And that went through the stages of game development from pre-production through to operations. So you have pre-production where you are basically planning out the game and everything that goes with it. Then you have production, which is all the nitty-gritty of chucking the audio in, doing the coding and everything. And so, for example, in a very large team that's developing a game, you'd have people that have specialized areas. And they all collaborate and work together on putting the game together. And then there's post-production, which includes shipping a game, and then you've got operations, which is everything from marketing to making money from selling microtransactions and things like that. So it was very interesting to read about game development from that point of view. However, I'd like to go over, in the first part of this video, the first lab that I did from part 1. From prototype 1, and following that, since I finished prototype 2, which was the meat shot out and fed the dogs that were coming down from the top of the screen, so that was prototype 2. So I'm going to cover the first lab just in retrospect, and then I'm actually going to do lab 2 as part of this video. So I'm going to do the next step in game design and just see how that goes. So without further ado, I'm going to show you my game design document for the game idea I came up with, and this is going to be my first real MVP when I get through all of the other prototypes as part of this learning. So I'm actually going to do the code and all of that for an actual game minimum viable product MVP. So here is the game design document. Hopefully that's big enough. What I might do is, if I zoom in a bit, that's probably a bit easier to see. So the project design document was a template, or template if you prefer, and it's broken up into areas. And so you come up with your project concept in the first section, or the first area, which is broken up into these different sections. And so you come up with your idea and you kind of flesh out your idea, and it's a way to manage your idea and see whether it's actually viable as you start to break it down. So this lab wanted us to come up with something simple, because otherwise it would just be too complicated to get through in the time allocated. Not that I don't have unlimited time, it's just when I actually start to implement this project, this prototype, this product, I am going to set myself some limited time to get through each of the stages. So first of all, the project concept, I came up with this idea of a game where you're flying a fighter jet and you are trying to shoot down the enemies that are coming from the other side of the screen. So you've got tanks, helicopters, possibly trucks. I was thinking ground units and air units that come through, and then you shoot those down. So I'm calling it a top-down side-scrolling game. So it's basically top-down. So you're looking down on top of the units, but you are coming from the left, and you can move to the right, back to the left, and up and down the screen. And then the enemies are coming from the right, even though it's top down. And so you'll have these tanks that are coming in on the ground, and you have these helicopters that are coming in. And hopefully I can depict it in such a way that you can see the tanks are on the ground, the helicopters are in the air, but you're this plane that's in the air that's shooting at everything. So essentially you move it with the arrow keys. They come in from the other side of the screen. You destroy them before they destroy you, okay? And then you've got sound and effects. So the sound effects when you shoot them, when they explode. And if I do power-ups, which is to me kind of a bonus thing, then there'll hopefully be a sound with picking up those power-ups, and then I'd like to add in background music as well. So as it progresses, the game obviously has to get harder, otherwise what's the point of playing, right? So more enemies appear, it becomes more difficult to destroy them, maybe they've got more health. However, as you pick up your power-ups, it increases the speed at which you can shoot your projectiles, maybe makes them stronger, maybe shoots multiple projectiles, keeping it as simple as possible in terms of description. And then it talks about the user interface, and this is where you have your score up in the top left, so it shows what your score is. Every enemy destroyed is probably 10 points, but if they make it to the left of the screen and you don't destroy them, then that's minus 10 points. So you keep going until you get destroyed. So essentially you can actually go into the negatives. So I came up with the title Battle Nova. That was not the first title I came up with. When I first started thinking about this, I thought of the title Jet Fighter. Cue AI generated image. I did a little tweaking and I did this image, Jet Fighter. However, strangely enough, and I don't know if this happens to other people, but I had this kind of half waking dream. As I was waking up in the morning, I drifted off and I was dreaming that I called my game Battle Nova, and so Battle Nova, here it is. This is another AI generated image. So yeah, I came up with the idea of calling it Battle Nova because it sounds a lot more fun to play. So other features, potentially a bonus if I get the game developed, is power-ups that make you stronger, and then high score being tracked and being able to just restart the game by pressing R. So the second section, or the second part, is around your project timeline. And so I basically put in, you can ignore these dates. Time of recording, it's the 29th of October. So this is tomorrow. So I've got to get all this done by tomorrow. No, there's no way. I actually wrote this design document last week. It's kind of preparation. So it's not like I'm going to be designing and developing a game right now this week. I have to get through each of the prototypes and through all of the labs and the tutorials before I actually put this into practice. So I thought about, well, the order in which I would do things, what makes sense to me. So searching for the assets and laying everything out, so basically plonking everything into the scene. Then I start to add movement for the player, the projectiles, and a bit of coding around a cooldown on the projectiles. And then I start making the enemies move, randomly spawning, and then triggers when the projectiles hit them. And then I add particle effects for them, sound effects, and background music in week 4. Week 5, I would start to increase the enemy spawn rate, so I set this incremental increase of enemy spawn rate and strength, and possibly add the power-ups, and then I start to add the counter and the scoreboard and get that ticking along, add a game over screen, and make sure that it stops spawning enemies, and then being able to restart. And then the backlog, which is basically your bonus, would be to track the high scores and enable player input. Now, I know I said earlier that other features would be the power-ups that make you gain power. I want that to actually be a key feature, and so that's why I included it in week 5 here, where I actually add the power-ups and sound effects for getting the power-ups, and I also add things like a game over screen, which I hope will be part of the core product or the minimum viable product. If not, parts 5 and 6 are kind of backlog. I don't know if I will be able to do that in the time that I'm going to allocate to myself. I'm probably going to start work on this next year because it's going to take me quite a few weeks to get through all of the prototypes and the learning. The last part of this is a project sketch within my game design document, and yeah, hopefully this just speaks to itself, this sketch. It should just make sense when someone looks at it. And also part of this lab was to pass this on to friends and family and just say, look, here's my game design document. Is it simple enough? Is it achievable? Etc. And I have a friend who has been programming in C# for many years, and although it's not game design, I thought, well, who better to kind of pass a game design document to? Someone who understands documentation and projects and timelines and stuff, and just say, look, is this simple enough? And the only question he had was, are you sure you want them scrolling right to left instead of top to bottom? And I thought about it and I said, well, yeah, I do, because top to bottom it's shorter, isn't it, vertically? And then if you have a game that goes horizontally, like a side-scrolling platformer, you have more on the screen that you can actually see. Don't get me wrong, I really liked that old game back in the 90s, Raptor, if anyone remembers that. That was top to bottom, where the enemies came from the top and you had your plane that you were flying from the bottom of the screen. You could move it up and down, left and right, and you picked up power-ups and shot more projectiles, and then when the boss came, you had to have as many power-ups as you could to defeat the massive mothership that came down. But I'd rather my game was left to right. So that's how I've depicted it, and yeah, that's my sketch of the game design document. So after that, as I said, after the lab was the tutorial around collaboration, working with people, project management, production, pre-production through to operations, and I looked around for project management type stuff, and I came across this thing called Codex, and it looks like it's designed for small projects. It's kind of similar to Trello, but to me it looks more gamified, which is kind of cool. I haven't done a deep dive into whether Codex is the right project management tool for me when I start working my game, but it actually looks pretty good. And these were basically pre-assigned things. So I said I want to do a game project, and it suggested all of these things, and I can add decks. I can go into the decks and I can just do all of the stuff. I haven't even looked at any of this. I can add tags. I can look at the metrics in terms of who's done what. I can add cards within the deck. So it's similar to Trello. It's different cards within your column. In this, it's a deck of cards, and you add your cards for each part of that area of the project. So it looks like a really good tool to use. So I'm actually thinking that I'll try this when I start my project. Alright, so the second part of this video is about the second lab for the second prototype, and I'm actually going to work on that as we go. So let's hop into Unity and I will walk through what is involved in the second lab. Created a new project called Personal Project in the Learning to Code, whatever it's called. What's it called? Create with Code, the Create with Code folder. So it's a 3D project, and first thing I want to do is, I'm actually going to adjust this a wee bit. It automatically has defaulted to the previous layout that I had, which is cool. And the first thing I want to do is just make sure that it's no longer called sample scene, but it is called, I think it's my scene, my game. Okay, we'll call it my game. And I've already got a main camera, and I've already got directional light. So that's cool. That's already there. It's just a completely blank canvas. Okay, so I'm going to look at what the next step is, and then I will do the next step in this lab. The first step in this new game world is to create an object, a plane, to basically give me a base of reference. So create a 3D object, a plane, which I can just call plane. That's fine. And then let's just zoom in a bit there. The plane, there we go. It is a flat plane, and it's not very big. So the recommendation in this lab is to actually scale it up. So if I make it 5 long and 5 wide, or 5 wide and 5 long, whichever works. Yeah, so there we go. I've got a large plane to work with. The whole point of this lab is to use primitive objects in place of actual game assets. So the first thing I want to do is get my player, which is the most important thing. The recommendation is just toss in a sphere. So I'm gonna get a sphere. Let's reset its position. Focus in. Shift the Y a bit so it's above the ground. Actually, let's zoom out a little bit and pop it up a little bit. Yep, that's just above the ground. Maybe just whatever, doesn't actually matter. So I'm going to rename it. Just do this, call it player. Next thing is I actually want a new folder. Create a folder. I'm going to call it materials because a white sphere is hard to see. So materials, and I want a new material, and we'll make it a blue sphere. So let's change the color of the sphere to that blue. I like that blue, that's nice. All right, so we've got a blue material and we'll just pop it onto the sphere and we've got a blue sphere. So there we go, this is our player. Now that I've got the player object in the game, the next thing that I want to do is adjust the camera so that it's in the right position for the particular gameplay. If I go back to my design document, it's a top-down, side-scrolling, and if I look at the sketch, I want it to be looking top-down, which means I'll raise the camera on the y-axis. I'll make sure that my player's off to the left, and when I start putting the enemies in, I'll make sure they're off to the right. So the camera needs to be raised, position, let's put it back to 0 there, 0 on the Z, and if we raise it on the Y, maybe 10, and then I will rotate it. So I want to go to the rotation tool, whoops, click camera, rotate, focus on the camera, and on the I want X and Z. I want to be able to see X and Z like that, so I actually want to rotate it on the Z. Nope. What happens if I rotate it on the... there we go. Rotate it on the X. So I want to make sure X is at 90. And then what if movement, I move the camera up to about here, and then I make sure that my player is to the left. So that's on the Z, no, that is, I see, so it's facing that way. That's my game direction. That looks really weird top down. Let's go back to the camera. Go orthographic. And it's in the wrong position. That's interesting. It's not actually showing it. Because it was too far out of the camera. There we go. Interesting. Alright, I'm going to fiddle around with this a little bit, and then I'll do the next part. I found that I had to shift the player around a bit, but if I set the camera size to a different size, then it takes up more of the plane. So I've set it to 7, and then I've shifted the player to the left, and you can kind of see the bounding box of the camera that takes up basically the whole of the X width of the plane. Now I want to start putting in the enemies. So if I go back to the design document and I look at the sketch, I am planning on having 3 types of enemies, and so I'll just use primitive 3D objects to put these in as they are, and since I do want to have power-ups as well, which is not actually on my sketch, the power-ups that are possibly going to come through to pick up, but I'll add them anyway. So to start with, I want to add some new 3D objects. So we'll make the enemies basic cubes, and I will reposition them soon enough. Actually, I want to, oops, just go into that, and we will reposition it so it's above the plane. Yep, cool. And just a bit. That's cool. Okay, so I know where the enemies are going to be. And I want to reproduce this so that I've got a few cubes, so one for each of the enemies, and then I'll do a capsule as a power-up. So I've dropped the enemies in and the capsule for the power-up, but the capsule's a bit big, so what I might do is shrink it a little bit. It's this little power-up. That looks good. That looks good. Alright, I think that's better. So I'll just go to that, zoom out a bit. Ooh, zoom out a lot. So I got my enemies here, I got my power up. Actually, I might make the power up a little bit smaller. Let's call it 0.5. Cool. I'll just leave the power up floating there. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create the colors for these just as primitive so that they're a lot easier to see. I think that's the last thing, is to create some more materials, and then I'll drop them onto the enemies and this, which is actually going to be the power up. I've created the materials, green, dark red, light red, and medium red. So I'm just going to drop each of these onto the appropriate things. So we'll go with light on enemy 1. Light red on enemy 1, medium red on enemy 2, and dark red on enemy 3. And then we have it. We've got our enemies, not equally spaced, they're just tossed in, but that's it. We've got a few primitive objects so far. That's it. I'm done for this lab. So I created a plane, I resized it, I dropped in a player object, I dropped in some enemies, I dropped in a power up, all just placeholders. I created some materials, dropped them onto all the objects, and then I created a backup. So I adjusted that off camera because I thought it would carry on, but it didn't. So I just went to export package, and it basically exported this group of my scene and my materials, my assets and stuff, into a Unity package just as a backup. And that's it. I'm done for Lab 2, and I'm done for this video. Thank you for watching.